Hi folks. Oh yeah. Um, we're down the front again this afternoon because it's lovely. The sun's shining, but it's a little bit on the chilly side with the wind. Um, so I'm going to sort of walk very slow today because obviously Hayden, love him, has got his coat on. Skosh hasn't, because she's made of tough stuff. I'm not saying that Hayden isn't, but he is, he is delicate, and he was a little bit poorly yesterday morning, but it was a miracle. It was a miracle because by the afternoon he was okay again. So yeah, it's quite a cool wind. So just sort of walking down this way. Gosh, there's quite a few sort of boats bobbing about out there. They're really summer moorings out there. Obviously the mooring fees are cheaper if you want to moor your boat out here, but they're usually only out here till September. And as I say, beached. They do beach occasionally with the strong winds that we get here. Yeah, so it's not too bad today, but as I say, it's definitely autumn, it's not summer anymore. That's for sure. So we'll carry on heading down this way a little bit. So today I want to talk about my dad. My dad. Yeah. I take after him actually because I've got his dimple. My brother hasn't got the dimple, but I've got it. I've got Dad's dimple. Don't know about anything else. He had grey hair when I came along. I never knew him with anything but grey hair, so he was, and it was always awful because he smoked like a trooper, like my mother, and he used to run his fingers through his hair, as you can imagine, and he used to get awful nicotine stains in his hair. I take after mum hair-wise. Thickness of, that's what I'm referring to, not the beauty of it. I had to cut my own hair during lockdown 4 years ago because obviously there were no hairdressers open. So and I can't afford really to go and get my hair cut. Used to love going and having my hair cut. I used to have highlights in it, and when I was working, it was great going to the hairdressers and coming out looking, as beautiful as I could be. But so obviously I'm going to grow my hair out now, but it needs tidying up because it's so thick, and that I take after my mother in that respect. So yes, my dad. Just going down onto the beach here, so I suppose she'll start digging in a minute, because she does seem to love digging, don't you? So my dad was he was born in the Cotswolds. I don't know a lot about him because I never met, my grandparents on his side, and it was all a bit tragic, really. He lost his dad, I believe, burned himself to death in bed, and I think he was my dad's father was an alcoholic. And I believe his mother committed suicide. So yeah, not a very good start for him. He he was one of three. He had two other brothers, who he didn't have much to do with, to be honest. I can remember seeing photos of them though, photos of my dad. I haven't got one single photograph of my dad, not one, because it will come up in later bits of my story that I went to America and took all my possessions with me and ended up being deported when I tried to get in back to America the second time, and so I lost all my possessions, everything that my mother had that I'd kept, personal diaries, all everything, just all stuff that I'd had, with my horses years ago that I'd kept. Lost it all, so I don't have one single photograph of my dad, which, I can picture him. I know what he looked like. He was not a tall man, he was quite a short man actually. And I believe that because of the circumstances obviously surrounding his parents, he was shipped off to Argentina, and he apparently had cousins or uncles or some relatives out there. My brother's done a bit of research into the Argentina connection. So he was sent out there at age 16, according to my mother, and his uncle or relative had a I don't know if you call them haciendas in Argentina, but it was a cattle ranch anyway, basically. And so my father became a gaucho, an Argentinian cowboy, which obviously that's where my passion for horses comes in, I suppose, through that. Although my mother had worked in the land army at a stud looking after Arabs. So she too had an affinity with horses, although she didn't ride herself. So my father was shipped out to Argentina, and while he was out there, they used to be like cowboys, going off, sleeping under the stars, rounding up the cattle. If you look up what gauchos do and what they are, then you'll have a rough idea that that's what my dad did. And I suppose, I don't know, I suppose he had a lot of anger, he had a lot of, his childhood couldn't have been great, can it? I think his mum was I don't know whether his mum was depressed or had mental health issues or... What are you actually barking at? Eh? What are you actually barking at? Oh. You're barking at a dog over there. Why are you barking at a dog over there for? No then. Right. Should we carry on walking then? You're on one today, aren't you? You're on one today. God love him. So yes, he was out in Argentina. He was a gaucho. They break horses. They didn't go through all this. Let's lunch it for 3 years. No, you got on them, you broke them, and that was it. But I kind of think you break the horse's spirit at the same time. But anyway, that was. So he was a gaucho, and the story was related by my mother, obviously related, to her from my dad. He got angry Uh, Lost his temper because he obviously had you know, bad, bad issues with his anger and lashed out, and apparently he murdered. Uh, he actually murdered another person. I don't know whether it was a gaucho, but apparently the guy whom he murdered actually tried to steal a piece of meat from my father, and so my dad apparently stuck a knife in the guy and killed him. And my mother, I mean, my dad would weep buckets. He'd sit there in the chair, you know, and you kind of think, oh yeah, but it's crocodile tears because of the alcohol. But he used to weep, saying that, you know, he killed this man, and, you know, had horrendous guilt over it, obviously. And he, my mum used to, you know, say to him, don't be ridiculous, of course you killed a man, you know, you were in the war, you stupid man. And he used to go, no, you don't understand. And then, you know, obviously the story came out and it kept coming out. So he obviously was riddled with guilt. Anyway, apparently what I was told was that it was all hushed up by his relatives or whatever. They buried the body. I don't know to this day whether they know, you know, what happened to the bloke. I haven't got a clue. How awful. But, and I think he'd been involved. Something to do. He used to he used to go on. You see, because he was in Argentina, he spoke Spanish. And he would rant and rave in, you know, go on in Spanish. And he couldn't understand, obviously, what he was on about. I mean, he knew what he was saying. He was very much in opposition and opposed to Eva Peron and all the politics that was going on. And he actually got, I believe, deported from Argentina and told never to return, which he used to laugh about, you know. So that was the Argentina connection. And when he met my mother, he was either still married to another woman, and he had a son who would be the same age as my eldest brother. And all I know is that my mum said that he was forbidden access to his son and was never to set eyes on him again, basically. His first wife, obviously, you know, because of what he'd done with my mother, and probably because of his behaviour and his drinking. I mean, he obviously had a drink problem in his first marriage, and you know, he was a cowboy, what can I say, you know, they drank, and he could knock back shots of whiskey and wouldn't even touch him. And so I believe he came back, you know, from Argentina after all that happened, and was deported, as I say, and told not to return, but because of his views to do with Eva Peron and the government. So I mean, I don't know anything about his schooling. I don't know where he went to school. I don't know, you know, don't know about his education. All I do know is that he desperately wanted to fly, and so he applied for the RAF, and they turned him down because he didn't have, first of all, relevant qualifications, I guess, because he hadn't, you know, finished his schooling or done his schooling. So my mum said he was so determined that he wanted to go into the RAF and fly that he cycled on a push bike 5 miles a couple of times a week or whatever to go to night school to get his qualifications in order to get into the RAF, which I think, you know, fair play to him for that. he was then refused because he was too short. And when I say too short, I mean he wasn't a midget, obviously. He wasn't a dwarf or anything like that. He was, what he said, he was sort of average height, really. But in order for him to fly, he had to be able to reach. I mean, I know nothing about planes. He took me up in one when I was quite small. I remember that, but apparently he couldn't reach the controls because they must have had controls on their feet, and they said no, you're too short. Anyway, because he was so determined, absolutely fiercely determined to join and fly in the RAF, he must have worn them down to the extent that they said, right, you know, you can we'll put blocks so that you can reach the controls. So I think that's hilarious. And so he, you know, he did get his dream. He you know, he got to fly, and I do know that he flew transport planes. I believe he flew Beverleys. He flew other planes also, but obviously, you know, he was a flight lieutenant. He then became a squadron leader, and my mum said, you know, that the men that served under him, they would have followed him anywhere. If he'd said, you know, jump off a cliff and give your life, they would have done it. He was respected, he was loved, he was admired. And apparently he got his DFC by I don't know what conflict. I mean, I would like to say Second World War. I think my sisters have told me he was in the reserves or whatever at some point. But he was a hero. I mean, obviously, you know, you don't get the DFC for nothing, do you? So he was coming back from a mission, I believe, and he was bringing his men back from a mission. He used to, you know, drop them off, I suppose. You know, they used to parachute in or whatever, I don't know. But he was bringing his men back from a mission, and he got hit by, you know, whoever the enemy was. I don't know, was it the Germans or wherever he was fighting in the war, or abroad somewhere, I don't know. It's so stupid that I don't know, but, you know, I thought I knew, and then I got put right, and I don't know. And the only way I can find out the full truth is to access his military records, and, you know, again, that costs money, doesn't it? As I say, we did try and access his records years back, and the person that my brother spoke to at the time, at, you know, at the personnel office where they hold all the records. Hiya. Hello, darling. Sorry, they're just saying hello to some dogs here. Hello, darling. Hello, how are you? I haven't got any treats, so I don't carry any. I'm ever so sorry. Bless your heart, you're lovely. Hang on. Oh, there we go. It's gone away now. Yeah, so the guy at the personnel office told my brother, he said, your father was a hero. He was a hero, and he did get mentioned in, you know, several of the newspapers when he received his DFC, etc. And my mum used to laugh. She said the kids cut their teeth on his DFC. And I'm gutted because he ended up flogging it for booze later on, which is another story in itself at that time. But so he got his home. He had an engine blown out and almost crashed. And look at that view. Look at that view. Oh, man. This is why I love living here. Look at that. Look at that. So he was a hero. By the time I came along, he left the RAF, I believe, and he was working for a local company that produced supplies for builders merchants. It was a builders merchants really, and they were, it was a well-known company that he worked for, but he couldn't adapt to civilian life. I mean, he used to fly his plane. Mum said he used to fly his plane over the top of the house where she was living at the time and rock his wings, like they do. And I just think, very romantic side, isn't it? But yes, but obviously he was extremely damaged, I mean, I think he was probably severely damaged, when he was sent out to Argentina. He wasn't alive during the Falklands kick-off, which, had he been, then I think he would have had quite a strong point of view of what he thought about Argentina. And, I mean, for all I know, I've still got relatives out there that I've never met. We're a strange family anyway, because none of us sort of really have ever stayed close or met up really. We do, we have met up, but I mean, I think most of us do our best to kind of stay away from each other if we can. No, I mean, not for me now, because, as I say, I've got past all that. So yeah, my father. So by the time, just looking at the time here, by the time I came along, he'd come out of the RAF, and the sad thing was that, good girl. And the sad thing, this is just on a toilet. The sad thing was that he couldn't adapt to civilian life, and my mum used to say that, when he was drunk, which was every day, and I'm not exaggerating there because it was every day, since he come home in the morning really, until he collapsed at night. Sorry, I'm just trying to pick this toilet up here. He couldn't adapt to civilian life, and when he was drunk, he used to go and get on the phone to the local, to the RAF base that he, served at, I suppose, or flown out of many times. And he used to say, right boys, we're flying tonight. And he'd get all his uniforms out and all his flying gear and stuff. And my mum, this would go on and on and on, and my mum would have to say, Frank, you're not in the Air Force anymore, you've left. And he couldn't cope with it. He'd been out in the jungle, I know that, because he contracted some kind of disease in his nails, which had made his nails go all, I mean, they were gross. They were all sort of, I don't know, just yellow and cracked and just horrible. And anyway, he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, I think we could cure that, Mr. Cole. And the doctor gave him this ointment or something that, anyway, it started working. It started clearing it all up. But my dad obviously had an RAF pension, which was, quite a substantial amount, I suppose, in the day. And obviously because he was a he'd been a squadron leader and he'd got the DFC. He was an officer. It was more than enough to live on. But as I say, he couldn't adapt, and in the end, my mother said she had to literally get all his uniforms, all his flying gear, and put it on a bonfire, make a bonfire and burn it all, because she said that's the only way that I could, get it through to him that he was no longer in the RAF, but in his head he was. It was chocks away, chaps. We're off. We're flying, and so sad. But he must have been one hell of a pilot. That's all I can say. To get the DFC, hey. I actually remember seeing his DFC. I actually remember seeing his medals. We used to play with them as kids. And so he, when I came along, he was working at this company, doing sort of various odd jobs and stuff. But, all his pension, all the money that basically he was earning as a pension and was supposed to be supporting the family and stuff, he drank it all. We lived in a council house, and my mum had to work 2 jobs in order to, keep us all afloat. But back in those days, there wasn't like the child support that you have now for your kids. If you had kids, you were expected to, to feed them and clothe them and look after them. It wasn't, left to the state to kind of pick up what you couldn't do. So, and when he died, he was penniless. He had nothing to leave anybody, and all he did leave was a load of empty bottles and his old car, which was knackered anyway. So that's a little bit of history, just a little bit of history really on what I know about him. When he was sober, he was the most amazing gentleman. I mean, he was an officer and a gentleman. But as soon as the booze kicked in, he was just mad, mental, absolutely mental. There's no other word to describe him. But you look at what he must have gone through, losing his parents like that, and I don't think his brothers really wanted anything to do with him. I can remember, this was probably a couple of years before Dad died. One of his brothers turned up, and his brother, my dad was sitting in the chair drunk like he usually was, and he just said to my dad, "Oh, how the mighty have fallen." And that's so true, isn't it? Isn't that true? He was a mighty man, and I believe he loved me. But we'll get more into my story. I just wanted to give you a bit of, that's really all I know about him. That's all I know about him. He was brilliant with horses. When I ended up having my own, he used to laugh his head off at me. All this rising trot. They used to sit, like proper cowboys with western saddles and stuff, and he just couldn't get his head around the fact that, how we ride in the West. But yeah, so that's just a little sort of history lesson really of him. But I don't really know a lot more. I mean, I'll go more into when he died and all the circumstances surrounding that, and obviously a whole chunk of what he was like actually to me and to my brother and to my mum. So, but I think again, it's incredibly sad, isn't it? Incredibly sad because back in those days, there was. Although I don't understand this because they brought in help for casualties from the First World War that were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm convinced that's what my father had. I know because I've had it. Maybe possibly do still have it now, but I like to think that I don't exhibit the symptoms that kind of go along with it anymore. But he must have been suffering, and he was when I came along. I think he was definitely a fully fledged alcoholic. But when I came into the world, my brother had already suffered 5 years at the hands of Dad, and I think that's where I'll leave it, and we'll pick up on the next video. So